Good evening. My name is Kenneth Daniel Willis from Piedmont, South Carolina. For those of you who don't know, I'm also the assistant pastor at Gospel Baptist Church here in Greenville, South Carolina. I'm a proud member of the Sons of Confederate Veterans. I've been associated with Camp 36 for several years now, and also a avid Civil War reenactor, historian, and graduated from Bob Jones University in 2011 with a degree in history. So these things I'm going to talk about today is something that have been very much a part of my life for many years, and I just wanted you to know that before we got into this. I'm sure many of you have noticed that there's a lot of hubbub going on the news, national news, local news, concerning the Confederate Battle Flag. And I want to first address the situation of why I'm doing this video. Sometimes when you write things on the internet or you write a letter to someone, it can be taken not knowing the right tone that you were giving. It can be misconstrued that you were coming from a different tone. So I feel it's important to do this video for the main reason that you can actually see and hear me talking. I'm not really big into making videos, but I think it's important that you understand where I'm coming from and the attitude with which I'm going to say what I am going to say. I do want to say, first of all, I do want to comment a little bit on the shooting in Charleston. If everything happens exactly the way it is said to have happened, then we are dealing with a white kid who was on some horribly mind-moving drugs, was an incredible racist, bigoted individual who obviously was filled with evil and went in and did something that is absolutely horrendous. And I'm very, very sad to say that unfortunately a lot of people like him exist in this world, but I wish somebody had been there in the service with a firearm and could have taken him out, because he that kind of person, the only thing you can do with them is lock them up or neutralize them, because they're just pure evil. And I am not condoning what he did. I am not at all. It could have been any ethnic group it was. It just so happens he targeted a black church. Absolutely unexcusable. I hope he gets the death penalty. I hope he dies. I hope he answers as he should for that horrible crime. And our prayers for our church go out to the victims of Charleston. And there's a lot of side discussions we could get in on that, but it's amazing to me that less than a week after this has happened, the call for the removal of the battle flag from the State House happens. We're not blaming the kid anymore. We're not blaming the drugs he was on. We're not blaming the obviously very interesting upbringing he had. We're not blaming his father giving him a weapon, knowing he's such and such a mental state as that. We're now blaming it's the white people's fault in South Carolina. It's the battle flag's fault. It's those Confederate soldiers' fault. And obviously that flag just reached out to him and made him go do that. I'm being a little satiristic, but so I want to just go over a little bit of history about the Confederate battle flag, because the thing that is amusing and humorous to me is that no matter what position you take for or against the battle flag, it's amazing how many people actually don't even know what the Confederate flag, quote unquote, really is and what it stands for. And I want to just give you a little bit of background, and I'm going to have links to everything I'm using. I'm going to have some information attached to this video. So if I say something and you're going, well, where is that? I have it all. Should have that attached there for you. But you have several Confederate flags, and people need to understand, when you say the Confederate flag, that could mean the specific battle flag, or possibly 20 or 30 different variations of that flag, or Confederate flags. But the three flags that were definitionally Confederate flags are, first of all, the first national flag. It's also called the Stars and Bars. The square-shaped battle flag that everyone looks at or the rectangular-shaped battle flag, that is not the Stars and Bars. That is actually called the Southern Cross. So the Stars and Bars is the Confederate flag that looks very much like, from a distance, either the Texas flag or the Stars and Stripes, or the Old Faded Glory, Old Glory. And we're going to get into why that has to do with the battle flag in just a minute. Second, we have the second national flag, which is a large rectangular flag with a small square battle flag in the upper left-hand corner, and then the rest of it is all white. It's also called the Jackson flag. It was the first official act of that flag in the Confederate government was to drape General Stonewall Jackson's coffin as he was laid there at VMI. It's also called the Stainless Banner because of the white dominant part of the flag. But then that leads to the third national flag, which came to be because on several occasions the second national, hanging limp in the wind, looked like a flag of surrender, and it caused some confusion, and the soldiers didn't really like it because it looked like a white surrender flag. So the third national was incorporated. It was the same as the second national, but it had a large red stripe on the far right end of it, so it looked like the stainless banner had been dipped down into a pool of blood, and for that reason it's also referred to as the blood-stained banner. Those were the three accepted flags of the Confederate States government. The battle flag was never accepted by the Confederate States government, so it is not a Confederate governmental flag. So if people want to claim racism, slavery, all of that, in which we're going to deal with that, they can't go to the battle flag. They've got to go to those first three flags. But the humorous thing is, most people have no idea what those first three flags are. I know someone who had a friend who actually drove a car to New York City, parked the car outside of buildings in the VIP spot with two of these third nationals, and the police didn't even know what it was. They thought he was an ambassador. They let him off the parking ticket. So it's just kind of humorous and sad on both sides that people don't even know that there were many other flags. And there is a host of variations of battle flags, but the battle flag in question today receives all the flack. It was used by the Army of Northern Virginia, some by the Army of Tennessee, and also a rectangular version was used as the Confederate Navy Jack. So why all the fuss over the battle flag? Why not fuss over the others? Well, mainly because people have no idea what the others are. They don't care to do the research, and that's a lot of the problem we're going through now, is that people do not want to learn. They just want to go along and feel good about slamming a flag and not even have any idea what it stands for. And that's why people like me get all flustered, because they don't even understand what the flag's about. They can't even call it by its correct name, but yet they're demanding that it be ripped down because it's a racist symbol. And that just irks me. But we're going to get into all of that, and I want to cover all of that. The origin of the battle flag. The battle flag was actually designed by a South Carolinian. His name was William Porcher Miles, and he submitted the design to the Confederate government early on, right after secession. And they did not like it because at that time there were only a couple of states in the Confederate States of America. So when he submitted the design with the St. Andrew's cross, the blue bars, and the red background, it looked very off-kilter. There were only a couple stars, and it was awkward. So the legislator said it looked like a pair of blue suspenders on a red tablecloth with some white tacks on it. They weren't very impressed with it. It was rejected. But at the Battle of Manassas, the first Battle of Manassas, or as the Yankees call it, Battle of Bull Run, the Stars and Bars, or the first national, was the Confederate battle flag. The Union was using the Stars and Stripes. The problem with that is in the lack of wind and in the heavy smoke and the confusion of the first big battle of the war, both sides had a lot of instances where the men did not know which flag was which. You can imagine the confusion in a battle when you're trying to rally to a flag and you have no idea if it's yours or the enemy's. Okay, Well, after the battle, both sides accused the other one of trying to use false flags to gain an advantage in the battle. They weren't doing that, but it looked that way. Well, General P.T. Beauregard requested Confederate Congress to please address the problem. And it said, gave them the reasoning I just gave you. And their response to him was, well, we have too many issues to deal with. Just get someone to submit one that the soldiers want to use specifically for the battlefield. It has nothing to do with the government, nothing to do with the legislature, just a flag that the men on the battlefield like and can easily distinguish from the enemy flag. Well, he turned to William Porcher Miles, who resubmitted his design, and by this time there were 13 Confederate states, so it worked out perfectly, and it was passed as the battle flag, and that's how the battle flag came about. It had absolutely nothing to do with secession, had nothing to do with slavery, nothing to do with racism. It was simply picked as a design that was easily recognized, and it is one of the most easily recognized flags on planet Earth today. So it is a testament that it accomplished its goal. Why 13 stars? 13 states, just like the original 13 colonies. The Confederate States saw themselves as justified as the 13 colonies were in rebelling against Britain. The same reasoning, but even more, and I will talk about that in a second. Blue stands for liberty, and the red for the blood of patriots that will be shed and spilt in the conflict. And the most interesting part of the flag is that it is a Christian flag. And I know that makes some people just lose their minds. But the cross is actually called not the St. George's cross, which is what we typically think of when we think of the cross of Calvary, but it was a St. Andrew's cross because most of the population in the South at that time, and even today, are descended from Scot-Irish ancestry. So these men wanted a William Porcher Miles in consulting with people trying to get this flag, because this is going to be something that the men are going to carry into battle, they're going to fight under, they're going to die under. It needs to be something that means something to them. A flag should mean something to somebody, and that's exactly what he did. The St. Andrew's Cross was a symbolic picture of their Scot-Irish Christian faith that most of them, obviously not everyone was a Christian in the South, but the predominant mindset was there was a fear of God, there was a respect of Christianity, and as a result, it's quite impressive if you start looking at the Confederate generals versus the Union generals, how many were actually ardent believers. And when you look at the Confederate generals and the Union generals and you want to set role models up for your children, you're going to go with the Confederate generals in most cases, because typically there was a sounder fear of God, not a Unitarianism as pervaded the North, but neither here nor there. But that St. Andrew's Cross was a spiritual picture that was carried into battle with those men. And perhaps, some might disagree with that, but the fact is that's what it was. So if you don't like that, that's really not the issue. The truth is what matters. Slavery and the battle flag. Okay, I've already shown you that slavery had no connection with its founding. Well, you have to understand, in all the years the United States has been in existence, only 4 of those years were Confederate authorized slavery. Okay, so you figure all that time up, but yet people want to raise a fuss about the 4 years the Confederate government allowed slavery at the same time the United States was allowing slavery. Okay, so it doesn't make any sense to me, and to people who think like I do, that want to go back and actually look at the truth. It's amusing that you take 4 years out of our history and pin all the slavery in the years of our history, over 200 years, on the South. Interesting. Not one slave ever entered the United States or any part of the United States, even during the Civil War, the war between the states, under a Confederate flag. All slaves in the history of this United States of America or the American colonies was brought in either under a foreign flag or a United States flag or a British flag. Okay? That is a fact that cannot be disputed. Not one slave ever sailed into this ocean under any Confederate flag whatsoever, and certainly not the battle flag. Just a thought. The first man in American history to own a slave legally in America was, in fact, a black person. So, this idea that the whites founded slavery in the United States and America, it's popular, but it's not historically accurate. Well, many say, the battle flag represents the Confederates and they were fighting for slavery. Well, I hate to get into this discussion, but I've got to for the purpose of this. Secession was not over slavery. Was it one of many reasons? Yes, there were about 14, 13 reasons. Slavery was the last one. But everyone in the United States knew and admitted that slavery was almost not even worth engaging in because it was not very profitable. The machines were coming along. They were making slave labor not worth getting into because a machine, you didn't have to feed it, you didn't have to clothe it, house it, take care of it. You just put it in the barn and it's done. No maintenance. But slavery was something that would cost you a lot of money. And one of my favorite things to laugh about is how every time the South is discussed, it's like every single Southern person is sitting on a big porch drinking lemonade with 1,000 slaves out in the backyard. That is absolutely insane. And the reason for that is less than 26% of the South even owned slaves. So you think about that, but we'll talk more about it. The states seceded over what's called the Morrill Tariff. It's spelled M-O-R-E-L-L, Morrill Tariff. And what you have to understand is at the time of secession, the South, and by that I mean the Cotton States, the Confederate States, were paying almost 80% of the federal income revenue and the taxes. And that was actually going to be increased by some things Abraham Lincoln was going to do once he took office. And it was known that if he won office, that the South was threatening to secede. Today we threaten to secede. Back then they actually had the spine to do it. And they did that. Because it was, why should we do all this work and then give you all the money? That doesn't make any sense. And it was constitutionally within the South's rights to pull out of the Union. Abraham Lincoln admitted that before his office, before taking office. He admitted that states had the right to pull out like that. And if someone tried to attack the Constitution, the states had a right to reject it and pull away from it. But he sang a different tune once he had the reins of the office. So, what started secession? Well, South Carolina seceded over the Morrill Tariff, the political and financial attacks of the North on our state. Yes, slavery was a part of it, but it was a very small part of it. Because you have to understand, in South Carolina, less than 4% of our population owns slaves. You imagine if there are 96, or you have 100 people on your street, 4 of them own a Lamborghini, everyone else owns a little, basically a moped. 96 people with mopeds are not going to war to protect the right of 4 people to keep their Lamborghinis. It doesn't make any sense. And it didn't then either. My ancestors were too poor to have slaves. I have a record of my great-great-great-great-grandfather John Mayfield, and his prized possession was his pig. Okay, he didn't have slaves. As a matter of fact, he actually hired 2 black people to live with him and help work his farm. They were not slaves. I have the list of his entire estate, what he owned, and they are not listed. They would be listed there. They are listed as free persons of color that he had hired along to help him work the farm because he couldn't take care of it by himself. Okay? So there were guys from South Carolina that when they got down to Charleston, that was probably the first time they'd ever even seen a slave. You think of the guys up in Pickens and Oconee and up in Walhalla, they didn't even know what a slave looked like. So it's incredible that this stereotype is just painted with a broad brush across the whole South, and it's not true. So that is why South Carolina got involved. And then the other states, of course, got involved because Abraham Lincoln invaded South Carolina when we asked him not to resupply Fort Sumter, which we offered to pay for. He wouldn't take the money for it, but he was going to send more soldiers into it to try to work on blockading our port. We fired on them, and then the whole world blames us for starting the war. That's fine. So that's one reason. And then also, Lincoln called for 75,000 volunteers to invade the South and force them at gunpoint to preserve the Union. So when people say Lincoln wanted to preserve the Union, yes, he did, at gunpoint. That's not really preserving the Union. That's saying you have the option to either come back into the Union or we're going to shoot you, burn your homes down, rape your women, take your things, and put you back in line. That's how it works. And that's what made the other states very quickly, some of them took a little longer, but jump in. Maryland itself was going to jump in, but Abraham Lincoln locked up their legislature. He locked up tried to lock up Virginia's legislature, and he had to actually go in and make the state we now call West Virginia. So that's not really giving the people the option to preserve the Union. That's holding a gun to their head saying, you will stay in the Union. And you can imagine how that went over back then. Not much better than it'd go over now. But let me give you a few slavery statistics. And this is not to try to impress you. This is just to try to make you think about some of these things. 20% of Southern slave owners owned only one slave. And that's typical. In South Carolina, it was even less than that. Because a slave was extremely expensive, and when you got one, you wouldn't beat it to death and mistreat it. That's another thing. A lot of times they take a few isolated incidents where a guy has a sick problem and he likes to beat people. If you had a Ferrari, which is we're talking about the same. I know that sounds a bad example to be using that with a human being, and I don't agree with slavery. So don't think that I'm defending it. I'm just telling you, if you had a slave, you took care of it. They took care of the slaves so well in the South that it made the northern factory workers jealous because the slaves down here, by and large, had it better than a lot of factory workers did up north because they were clothed, fed, educated, churched, and taken care of, and even had their own little farm plots behind their houses where they could earn their own wages and actually earn money to buy their freedom or to do whatever they needed to do. But that does not make it onto the History Channel. That does not make it into our textbooks because they are written, as the Confederate President Jefferson Davis said, if we lose the war, we're going to lose everything. They're going to lose the education, and we're going to lose the heritage because Yankees are going to write the textbooks. They're going to be the teachers, and we see that even in Christian education. It's that way. I'm not... What do you do? That's the way it is. 20% of Southern slave owners only own one slave. 3% of slaveholders own more than 50 slaves. Only 3% of slaveholders own more than 50 slaves. So 3% of the South, which, by the way, only 26% of the South own slaves. So of that 26%, only 3% of that own more than 50. So I think we can dispense with this sweeping generalization that the Southerners all had these massive plantations. That was unbelievably rare because you had to have a lot of money. And you had to have a lot of money to spend before you could make money. Only 15% of slaveholders in the entire South own more than 500. So once again, it gets even smaller. Only 26% of Southern households own slaves. Already went over that. 74% of the South did not even own slaves. The top 5 states with the highest percentage of free black Americans, and I want you to listen to this, the top 5 states with the highest percentage of free black Americans were Delaware, Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, and Louisiana. Unbelievable, but true. 4 of them were southern states. Maryland was classified as a southern state, still is technically. 10% of slaveholders were female. Just interesting. And also, one last final thing. The largest plantation in South Carolina at the start of the war was owned by a black freed man who had earned his freedom, purchased his freedom, and then started a slave plantation. So, I'm sorry, but the generalizations of slavery according to the South just do not add up. So let me get back to the battle flag. I'm sorry we took that detour, but we needed to take that one. Race and the battle flag. I do want to talk about this. A lot of times I heard someone someone on the news, I think it was Fox News, and then someone, I was just reading through the Facebook comments on stuff, and they said, yes, the battle flag was a symbol of freedom, but only for white men. Okay, well, that's not a true statement. That couldn't be farther, nothing could be farther from the truth. And the reason for that is, yes, there were a lot of white men in the Confederate Army, predominantly because of that's the way our country was on both sides, predominantly white men on both sides. That's not a fair statement. There were Hispanics in the Confederate Army. There were Asians. There were many Europeans. The Cherokee, the Choctaw, the Chickasaw, and the Indian nations. By the way, the Indians were going to get to keep their land, and they were going to get to stay on them, and they chose to fight with the South because the South was going to honor them. They were the first government in our history to give them full rights to their land and to promise to leave them alone. And now ask an Indian how the U.S. government took care of that problem. Yeah. There were over 2,000 Jews that we know of that were in the Confederate Army. There were over 80,000 blacks. Now, take a minute, catch your breath. That is true. There were over 80,000 blacks, and I don't mean stretcher bearers, musicians, cooks, servants. There were plenty of those too. There were over 80,000 armed black soldiers in the Confederate Army. And some of you are going, well, I don't know about that because you never hear of them being taken prisoner. Well, that's because the Federal Army had a policy of when they captured a black Confederate soldier, they would not record him as a POW. They would record him as contraband. They would either get rid of him, kick him out, send him on his way, or they would kill him on the spot. That sounds, if you don't like that, that's the truth. Also, the other problem with that is when the Confederate enlistment was made, there was no place on the enlistment form for your race. You were a Confederate soldier. So you can't go through the Confederate records and try to find, well, here's a black guy, here's a white guy. They didn't care. It was you're a Confederate soldier. You're a Southern man. There was no race discrimination in that matter. If you were a black man and you wanted to join the Northern Army, you could not do that, actually, for quite a while into the war, at least on large scale. There were finally regiments formed, like the 54th Massachusetts, that's probably famous for the movie Glory, even though that movie's depicting another regiment, but never mind. You could not have the same pay as the white soldiers. You could not eat where the white soldiers ate. You could not sleep where the white soldiers slept. You could not hold an office. You could not be an officer, maybe a non-commissioned, but you certainly could not be an officer. And when you were buried separate from the white soldiers. Yet in the Confederate Army, you had the same pay, you slept in the same place, you ate in the same place, and when you were buried right by your white comrades. And this is a point that I've got to just hammer on because I have stood over the graves of black Confederate soldiers who fought with weapons, muskets, gunpowder, knives, pistols, and cannons, and fought the Union Army for the same reason my ancestors did. I have stood over their graves, poured the canteen on them in respect for them, and did gun salutes over their graves, bagpipe over their graves, and when I hear that no black people ever fought or served in the Confederate Army, it does make me a little bit crazy, because I have been to their graves, I have read their words, read the words of their families, met their descendants who know the truth, and proudly wave the battle flag. I know black people who have dressed up in gray, wave the battle flag, and thank God for their godly Confederate Southern heritage. And so when I see and hear this nonsense that no blacks ever served or fought in the war, I have to stand up and say, I'm sorry, that is baloney, that is an absolute lie, because I've been there and seen their graves. I've stood on their graves, and I've met their families, and know it's not true. The battle flag in the KKK. I have actually got to listen to a man named H.K. Edgerton. He is a member of the Sons of Confederate Veterans, and he has a personal account of what his family went through back in that time after the war. And he actually, and I will put this link in as well, he was actually praising the actions of the original KKK. Now, please be careful. Do not misunderstand what I'm saying. The original KKK was a vigilante sort of thing that was formed because when Reconstruction started, all Southern whites were not allowed to hold office. The only ones who could hold office were carpetbaggers who were sent down by union companies, union politics, to corruptly take advantage of the Southern population. That stopped in South Carolina under Governor Wade Hampton, who went to the White House and told the president that if he didn't withdraw federal soldiers within 72 hours, South Carolina would forcefully remove them by all the ex-Confederate soldiers taking up arms and moving them out. That discussion obviously went well for Wade Hampton, because in 2 days the Union soldiers were ordered out of South Carolina and Reconstruction ended there. That was many years after the war. In other states, though, that original KKK helped establish some law and order. Now, it quickly turned bad, and a lot of the reason is some of the Union people actually sent people down to do things under the auspices of the KKK, and very quickly it began to turn bad. The founder of it, General Nathan Bedford Forrest, resigned, got out of it when he saw that happening. He said, I'm not going to be associated with that, or even, I don't want someone to even think that I'm associated with someone like that. But to hear a black man try to say that today would make news anchors lose their minds, because they don't want to hear that. Even if it is true, they don't want to know that. And the KKK from that point, I obviously would have nothing to do with. It is a hate group. It is a racist, bigoted, not only against blacks, but Jews, Hispanics. I have nothing to do with that. It's totally immoral, ungodly. Nothing is good about that. But I wanted to make that point that the battle flag gets associated with the KKK. Well, so does the United States flag. So does the Christian flag. Why is the battle flag then the only one that takes heat for it? And I want to talk about why they like to go after the battle flag. Why, of all these flags, and knowing what we've just gone over, why is the battle flag blamed for everything? And I'm going to tell you the answer, and it's going to make some of you very upset. And some of you are going to know where I'm coming from. Some of you, it's just going to, you're not going to like it. But once again, that's irrelevant. The battle flag is a symbol of freedom from oppression and tyrannical government. And it always has been that from the very second it was formed. It was a symbol of our Southern godly heritage, our love of states' rights, and the Constitution, the United States Constitution, by the way. And it is a symbol of our men going into battle, looking to the God of heaven who brought their forefathers through the American Revolution to bring them through against the tyrannical government of Abraham Lincoln and the federal government of 1860 and 1861. That is what that is about. They don't like that. The liberal left doesn't like that. And unfortunately, a lot of believers don't like that because they have no idea they don't even understand any of what I've just said. They jump on this bandwagon. Oh, it's hate. It's racism. They have no idea what they're talking about. So typically, I had a gentleman the other day email me and said, I don't appreciate the stand you're taking on the Confederate flag. I think you're making an idol of it, and it's very offensive the way you're talking about it. And I asked him, I just said, messaged him, I said, well, sir, may I ask you, where are you from? And he said, I'm from Pennsylvania. And I'm thinking to myself, well, then that's probably why you feel that way. I know people from New York who have told me, Ken, if we have to go through another Civil War, I'll be wearing gray this time, because I know that it was about Constitution versus central government. It wasn't about North and South. It wasn't about white and black. Why would black soldiers be fighting against the federal government with an army that, quote-unquote, is about slavery and racism? That does not make any sense at all. It's laughable, except that it's so prevalent that we can't laugh about it. We have to fight that mindset. So the flag is a symbol of truth. The flag is a symbol of freedom. It is a flag that is a symbol of hope against oppression, and that is why the left hates it. That is why the NAACP, which is essentially a communist organization, hates that flag. That is the same people who are burning the American flag or the United States flag are wanting to burn this battle flag. And I know a lot of Christians think, well, we can't offend people. Perception is reality. No, perception is not reality. Perception is perception. If it's perceived to be something, that does not mean that what is perceived is reality. That is an idiotic statement, and I am sorry if that offends you. But that is an absolutely absurd statement. I cannot. What if the Bible offends people? What if the Christian flag offends people? What if the cross offends people? But it actually does, because it says, Paul says the cross is an offense to people. Does that mean I part with the cross because I don't want to offend people? That is the mindset of this modern America, pluralistic Christianity. We want to try to be as Christ-like as possible with offending the world as little as possible. It cannot be done. That is not Christianity. Christianity says there is a God in heaven who created everything. There is His Word, there is truth, and there is falsehood. I am standing with the truth no matter what anyone says or thinks, and it is the same fight we are fighting here. I know that's going to make some of you mad, but the battle flag is a Christian symbol of truth, freedom, and our godly heritage in the South. They hate it. They hate the Constitution because it was written by men from the South, predominantly. The Declaration of Independence was written by a man from the South. The wars that we have won, the American Revolution was won predominantly by the South. George Washington in the North leading the army, and then the Southern militia and backwoods guerrilla fighters in the South actually turned the tide of the war. They hate it. They write it out of the books. Is it because they hate the Southern people that this happens? I don't think so, possibly, but the main reason they hate the Southern heritage is because God is everywhere in that heritage. Satan hates God, his followers, the liberals, Republican or Democrat, by the way. I'm not defending either party. Personally, I'm getting ready to just want to throw all of them out, no matter what party they're in. But the hatred of God is what drives the hatred of this flag, and the ignorance of what it stands for. A lot of Christians, this week, a lot of good Christians, they mean well. Okay, I'm not attacking the genuineness of their faith. Please don't understand that. Please understand that I am not attacking someone's genuine desire to not give offense. But you've got to understand, just because someone is ignorant of the truth, just because someone doesn't want to go read this or never has heard this, does not mean that I need to part with it. There's a verse that said in Proverbs 22, "Remove not the ancient landmark, which your fathers have set." This ancient landmark was something our forefathers in the South died for, bled for, and gave everything they had, lost everything they had for. And if I part with it as a son of a Confederate soldier, many soldiers, I am betraying them. I'm betraying what they died for, what they fought for. After the war, they looked to the descendants of their Confederate soldiers, and they said, you are going to be charged with the defense of this history because the winners, the central government, is going to try to erase it and misconstrue it, and they're going to call us traitors. They're going to call our cause devious, and they have done nothing but that for the last 150-something years. They have tried to erase it. It was halted somewhat by Woodrow Wilson's administration, but after that time, it has been nothing but attacked. And this last week, we are seeing it in full boldness, where they are trying to ban our flags from being printed. If you don't have a Confederate flag, I hope you will get one. You can go to the Confederate Museum downtown and get one. You can get one at Ruffin's Flag Company. If you need another website, you contact me. I will get you a Confederate flag. I will get you to a place where you can get one. It is the most crucial time in the South's existence since the end of that war, because they are trying to erase our history. Not only that, they're trying to take our symbol of our godly heritage away. And I intend to fight it until I breathe my last, because if you can't stand for truth and you can't stand for what you know is right, I don't have 10 seconds for you. Honestly, I don't. If a preacher gets up and can't stand for the truth of the Bible, I don't have 10 seconds for him. So this is an issue of honor. This is an issue of right and wrong, truth and falsehood. And if we are going to be counted for anything, I could not go to my Maker knowing that I let the left, the liberals, the haters of God, and those who, I'm sorry, but are just simply ignorant of these facts, get me to forsake this ancient landmark that has been handed down generation by generation to our people. I could not look the Lord in the face. If the Lord himself came down and told me that this Confederate flag was wrong, I would know it was not him speaking. Okay? This is a symbol of right. This is a symbol of Christianity, a symbol of morality, biblical virtue, and honor. And I know people are going to disagree with that. I know some of you are literally losing your mind right now hearing me say all that. But this old Southern boy is going to fight for it till he's dead. And God willing, it's going to be in my casket when I go to the grave, because this thing, this flag, what it stands for is who I am. It's who we are as Southern people. Now, if you're from up north, you can join the camp. You can come on down and be historically born again, as we call it. There's nothing. I have nothing against people from being in the north, because now the people in the north have seen through history that the South was onto something back then. And one of the greatest tragedies is a lot of us tend to think it was North and South. You talk to a European, talk to a German or an Englishman, they'll tell you it wasn't North and South. It was Constitution and central government dictatorship. And we're fighting the same thing right now. We've got the same thing going on in the White House. We've got the same exact issues going on right now. If you'll watch the news, read, and actually learn what's going on, you would understand that the same issues we face right now are what split this country in two in 1861. So I wanted to make that to you, and I didn't mean to preach, but there you go. The flag is for truth, and I'm going to fight for it, and I hope you will too. God bless. God bless the South. God bless Dixie.